Hace unos días tuve la fortuna de ser contactado por Remedy para jugar un poco de su próximo juego, Control Resonant, y desde ya puedo decirte que lo que probé promete bastante. También pude entrevistar al director del juego, Mikael Kasurinen, a quien pude preguntarle varias cositas acerca del desarrollo de este nuevo título. En este video te voy a hablar sobre mis impresiones sobre Control Resonant y te mostraré un poco de lo que platiqué con el director. Pero antes de iniciar debo decir que nada de esto sería posible sin tu apoyo al canal y el contenido, porque la verdad es que todo esto solo es posible gracias a que tú ves los videos. Gracias por eso. Ahora sí, hay que poner una intro mamalona. Bien, pues mi sesión de juego duró aproximadamente unas 3 horas, en las que pude probar 3 secciones diferentes del juego, o bueno, realmente 2. La primera fue una especie de prólogo tutorial, la segunda una pequeña muestra del mundo que vamos a explorar, y finalmente jugué toda una misión de principio a fin donde pude conocer más sobre la experiencia de combate y niveles que nos va a ofrecer Remedy con Control Resonant. Debo mencionar que no me permitieron capturar todas las 3 horas de juego, y lo que verás en el video lo capturé desde un PlayStation 5 Pro en modo rendimiento. La gente de Remedy me pidió que por favor no moviera nada de los ajustes, y aunque mi impulso de estupidez casi gana, resistí la tentación. Pero bueno, como mencioné, la primera parte que jugué parece ser el inicio del juego, donde conocemos a nuestro nuevo protagonista, Dylan, el hermano de Jesse Faden del primer Control. En este título jugaremos con él en busca de nuestra hermana que por alguna razón ha desaparecido. Todo esto mientras tratamos de detener el gis que se ha extendido por toda la ciudad de Manhattan. Jesse. Pero tener un nuevo protagonista no es el único cambio en Control Resonant. Remedy no tiene miedo a experimentar y ha cambiado por completo el gameplay a un RPG de acción. Nada que ver con el shooter en tercera persona del primer juego. En Resonant, desde los primeros minutos tuve que elegir un estilo de arma para comenzar. Había 3 opciones: una especie de guadaña con buen alcance y daño en área, 2 armas rápidas pero con menor alcance, y por último estaba la siempre confiable arma de fuerza. Un mazo lento pero con ataques contundentes. Por el tiempo que pude jugar, creo que el combate está muy bien logrado, aunque podría cambiar un poco dependiendo el arma que elijas. En mi caso se sentía rápido y con combos fluidos. Yo tenía 2 tipos de ataque, uno débil y uno fuerte que puedes elegir a tu gusto. Hay uno con muchísimo alcance para golpear múltiples objetivos a la vez, otro que convierte tu arma en una especie de lanza que da golpes rápidos, y otra que te permite hacerle bong a un enemigo. Además se agregó una barra de aturdimiento que se va llenando conforme vayas golpeando a un enemigo hasta que tienes la opción de rematarlo. Acá lo interesante del combate es que sigue habiendo oleadas de enemigos como en el primero, pero ahora la única forma de acabar con ellas y avanzar es eliminando a los enemigos más fuertes. Mientras no acabes con ellos, van a seguir apareciendo enemigos, débiles pero infinitos. La verdad, mi primera impresión es que el combate ha aumentado su dificultad. Al principio estaba muy tranquilo, disfrutando del tutorial, barriendo a todos, pero cuando pasé a la sección 2 y 3 me la dejaron ir sabroso. Yo quiero creer que es porque pasé del tutorial a una zona mucho más avanzada yendo de 0 a 100, pero pues quién sabe, tal vez el combate sí está más complicado o no soy tan bueno. Ahora que el juego ya no es un shooter, te obliga a buscar el combate cuerpo a cuerpo. Aunque tampoco vas a estar indefenso, porque vuelven las habilidades sobrenaturales que también debes elegir. Puedes lanzarle rocas al enemigo, muy al estilo de Jesse, crear un escudo o invocar una entidad que te ayuda a distraer al enemigo con ataques a distancia. Esa es la que yo elegí porque las otras ya estaban en el primer juego y quería probar algo diferente. Acá puedes verla en acción. Y bueno, con lo que pude probar, me queda claro que la experiencia de combate va a ser muy personalizable. Tienes la opción de elegir muchos de tus ataques para adaptar las cosas a tu estilo de juego. Eso me gusta. Creo que el Dylan con el que yo voy a jugar puede ser muy distinto al que tú vas a utilizar, y es un gran acierto para que cada uno juegue a su manera y disfrute del juego como más le guste. Entre otros elementos de RPG que pude ver es el árbol de habilidades, que creo tiene buen tamaño, no me parece ni muy grande ni muy pequeño. Habrá que ver qué tal funciona a la hora de elegir tus talentos. Que por cierto, otra cosa que me gustó de esta prueba fue saber que mantienes varias habilidades de la primera entrega como el dash o poder levitar, pero ahora estas son mejoradas con cosas como doble salto que te permite llegar a mayores alturas o poder correr. Este tipo de cosas me gustan porque si vienes del primer juego no tienes que volver a aprender lo que ya sabías, simplemente lo ejecutas con sus nuevos agregados y eso da un sentimiento de que en verdad estás jugando una secuela que respeta lo que ya hiciste en el juego anterior. Además, durante este combate con un jefe vi que hay ciertos elementos de plataformeo que le dan un toque interesante al gameplay. Como te mencioné, en la segunda sección que jugué pude ver un poco del mundo que vamos a explorar, aunque no me dejaron grabar esa zona. Pero puedo decirte que vamos a poder explorar este mundo de una forma más libre que en el primero. Aún así, Remedy está siendo muy cuidadoso con la forma en la que habla de su mundo abierto. No quiere que la gente se haga falsas expectativas, porque sí, va a ser un mundo más grande y abierto que el primero, pero tal vez no tanto como otros juegos enormes. Aún así, vamos a conocer varios NPCs, tener misiones secundarias, recolectar coleccionables y hacer esas cosas muy de mundo abierto que seguro ya te imaginarás. De esta segunda sección pues no puedo comentar mucho, pero donde la cosa se puso interesante fue con la última sección y mi favorita de todo lo que jugué. Una misión de principio a fin donde tuve que atravesar una zona con un diseño muy interesante. Toda una muestra del diseño de niveles que es muy Remedy y yo espero ver más de esto en esta entrega. Acá tocó ir jugando con la gravedad y escalando paredes, acabando con enemigos. Al principio la verdad es que mi cerebro se confundió un poco, pero poco a poco le agarré la onda. El minimapa me ayudó a orientarme, todo para llegar hasta el fondo de este lugar para tener un enfrentamiento con un jefe y varias hordas de enemigos. Mira, nada más. De hecho, yo hasta podría decir que en ocasiones sentí un poquito de hack and slash en el combate, pero solo un poco. Y bueno, la prueba terminó de una forma muy Remedy, donde nuevamente tuve que atravesar el nivel jugando con la gravedad para encontrar la salida y mi única guía era una televisión encendida con música. Después de esto, mi demo terminó con un agradecimiento por parte de Remedy por jugar esta prueba. Y bueno, después de mi experiencia puedo decir que me quedé con muy buenas impresiones de lo que va a ser Control Resonant. Jugué en un PlayStation 5 Pro y el rendimiento fue bastante bueno, con 60 cuadros estables en modo performance. Aunque no quiero hablar mucho de esto porque sé que no es la versión final y la gente de Remedy me comentó que hay cosas que siguen puliendo para tener todo listo el día de lanzamiento. Y bueno, a mí me interesa saber qué es lo que opinas sobre lo que has visto. Cuéntame en los comentarios. Pero también, como te mencioné, tuve la oportunidad de entrevistar a Mikael Kasurinen, director de juegos como Quantum Break, Control y ahora Control Resonant. Aproveché para preguntarle algunas cosas sobre este nuevo juego, así que esta es la entrevista. Para comenzar, no podía quedarme con las ganas de preguntarle directamente a Mikael por qué cambiar de un shooter a un RPG así como así. Y la verdad es que su respuesta fue mucho más completa de lo que yo esperaba.
There are two different sides to that question. One is like if you go into the kind of a deep question of why, it's purely because of me. Like I'm a big RPG fan. I like games where it feels like you have an explorable world that you can enter and you have an agency in it and there's many different paths you can choose and so on. I care a lot about that. I feel like players well, from my perspective, I feel like what makes gameplay rewarding is that there's that sense of agency and autonomy. Okay. So that's always been the case whenever I've worked on games. As I came back to Remedy in 2014, I started in 2001, worked on Max Payne 2, Alan Wake, and so on. And I love the storytelling that Remedy has and its ability to create worlds, and being part of that is wonderful. But then at the same time, I left for a bit and then came back. I worked at Avalanche Studios and at DICE. When I returned, I had this feeling of I want to see what is an RPG Remedy experience. What would it look like? What would we have to do to make it work? And first off, I focused on Quantum Break. I was the game director there, but my first time directing. Okay. And while doing it, I looked at shooting is something that we've been doing for a long time already. How can we push more the supernatural side of things, have this abilities that you use together with them, and how can we push the RPG side of like you being able to find more, let's say, ways of modifying your character and different builds and so on, like have more creativity in regards of how you approach different situations. And when we started to concept Control for the first time, me and Sam, like, we sat down and we discussed a lot about like what are the kind of core ideas of this world and so on. And what we chose to do differently right from the beginning was that instead of talking about what's the main character and so on, which we've done before, instead let's talk about the world. And that's when we created the thoroughbred of control, the idea of the hiss and objects of power, all of these things. Like, we created a world first. And only after that we started thinking about like, okay, how do we tell stories within this world? And I want it to be a world that can have a lot of different types of stories, not just one story or not just one character, but like a cast of many characters. And then as we create games, we can actually jump into a different character instead of continue with the same one. So I guess, and sorry, I'm coming like a long road back to the to a question.
No, it's okay.
That decision was made early on, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
I was interested in finding what is Remedy's version of an RPG franchise, and Control is that. And with the first game, I already wanted to kind of introduce elements like it's not just one campaign, one story that is of a character, but it's more like you step into a world that, yes, your character has a story, an arc through it, just like with any other Remedy game. But then on top of that, it feels like it's a world with other stories as well. So it was the first time that we had a thing which we tend to call side quests. So other things for you to do that you can go and complete separately from your main campaign. We've never done that before. So that was one of the first steps we did. And then of course you can customize your characters way beyond any of our previous games, like even just changing outfits for Jesse. We've never done outfit changes in any of our previous games, for instance. So you can choose that, you can modify the service weapon in different ways. So we crave like a lot of more agency for the players on shaping the let's say, call it the build of the character and so on. And things like you can have conversations with characters, you can pick dialogue choices and so on. So you can already see that we're kind of bringing in these kind of familiar things from other RPG games into a Remedy game. And that's what Control kind of set in motion. And to me, it was always just the first step. We're gonna ease into this world, use the strengths of Remedy that we had in the past. We're good at doing third-person shooting and, you know, all of those things I wanted to kind of hold on to. So that's why, you know, Jessie has a gun and so on. And also because it suits her style as well. So all of this has been thought through as a package. But to me, it was always the first step. With Control Resonant, we take a big next step, going even further into that direction. So it feels like this larger world that you're kind of stepping into. But now we're expanding all the different kind of areas, what you would call like an RPG game. Like the zones are bigger compared to the previous game. There's more different types of quests, more different types of activities. You can customize your characters in a lot of different ways compared to the first game. And we put a lot of more like choices for the players to kind of choose from in regards of the whole experience. Our outfit system is more complicated. It's not just one single thing. It's actually 3 different components. So you can choose your hairstyle and so on. We're doing a lot. And basically, it also meant that we now don't call it an action adventure anymore. Now we feel like, no, this is a full-blown action RPG experience, and that was always the plan.
Relacionado con este cambio de género en el juego, también le pregunté a Mikael sobre las diferencias que hay a la hora de desarrollar un shooter con un RPG y cómo es que se logró esto.
I think so to a degree. I do think there are action RPGs out there that can be also shooters at the same time. I think the key difference that we do is that it's not only about shooting. Like Control 1 had the supernatural abilities, Jessie can levitate, she can control the environment, and really what allowed her to really like succeed was to use both to be able to kind of fight back. I do think that with melee, it requires maybe a more rich selection of options in regards of what types of weapons you can actually have. And I really like what melee does to your way of looking at the world. With the gun, you usually kind of create this sense of distance to other enemies, so you tend to hide behind covers and so on. You just think like that when you have a gun. But with the melee weapon, you inherently understand that no, you need to be aggressive, you need to keep moving, you need to go from one enemy to another, and you should never stay put because you can't really do the things you need to do. So it feels organically, I think, easier as an environment to push for that kind of a control aggression, while at the same time making sure that there's a lot of interest in different types of forms that the weapon can take, and it has its own kind of upgrade trees and so on. So yes, there's like more variation we can create in the different setups with the melee approach for sure. And just simply because it's a bigger thing. It looks cool when you have a massive hammer and so on.
Yes,
with the gun, there's limitations like to how big it can become and so on. So I think it also provides this visually richer sense of variation for the experience.
Yo creo que si algo ha logrado Remedy con Alan Wake 2 y Control es encontrar un estilo bastante único para sus juegos. Por eso pregunté cómo es que Remedy trabaja esto y qué nos espera en Control Resonant.
We want to keep things fresh. There's a different choices that we're of course making with every game that suits the experience that we want to build. We always want to have a unique take. We got known for this kind of a narration, for instance, in Max Payne and Alan Wake, narration was in a big role. Like you can hear the voice of the character and almost like outside of the experience talking about how they feel and so on, which is really powerful and cool. But for instance, with the first Control game, I wanted to find a different way to do narration where it feels more in the moment and like feels like it's not like a separate entity talking, but it's the main character where things are unfolding as they see it. So we hear Jessie's thoughts, but it's as if she's talking to somebody. And that was like a wonderful kind of a setup for the style that we had for it.
What are the core pillars of Control Resonant?
Yes, I can go through some of them. There are many, because there are many different areas for the game and so on, and then it's kind of broken down into art, design, and narrative, which are all of this. But on a high level, what was important to me was that it is a world that you can return to.
Okay.
And that's a kind of a core principle for all Control games, that it feels like it's not just one story that you're experiencing and then you're done. It feels like you're stepping into a world that feels almost like it existed before you entered it. And it has a lot of different types of stories, and it's up to you how to navigate through that. So that feeling of like you want to return to this kind of a place that's like an emotional kind of a core to the experience.
Seguro si te suscribiste a mi canal es porque te gusta conocer más sobre la historia de un juego. A mí me encanta todo el tema de la narrativa y me imagino que balancear esto con un buen gameplay no debe ser algo sencillo. Así que pregunté cómo es que se logra una experiencia con buena historia y gameplay divertido.
Yeah, that's really tough. We want the game to feel like a cohesive package. Sometimes games can be a bit weird where you feel like there's gameplay and there's storytelling, and they live like almost like in two different worlds. You go through a combat scenario, and then there's a surprising cinematic, and now it's story time. And once you're done with the cinematic, you go and do something else. So they feel a bit disjointed, right? Like can feel. Depends on the game, of course. What we wanted to do was make sure that we tell stories in the right way in an environment where you have a lot of agency. So all the quests have been built in such a way that you don't have to run through them like a pearl necklace. Like you don't need to go from one quest, main quest, to another main quest directly, but you can stop and do other things in the meanwhile. And then it's up to you when you want to continue with the main quest. And we kind of told the story of that in such a way where it feels natural. And that wasn't trivial. We had to really think how the characters behave, how they talk, what is the purpose of the quest. So it doesn't feel weird that it waited maybe 4 hours before you chose to tackle it and so on. So we had to think through the story in that kind of a way. And what was important to us was that it feels immersive at all times and interactive. So it's not something like, again, feels passive where you kind of watch a cinematic for a long time, but it feels like as you experience the story, it's you playing the game, if you know what I mean. And meaning active choices on dialogue and choosing your path through it. There's a degree of choices you can make and so on. So story is the game was the kind of a big principle for us. And everything's been built with that in mind. And yes, it is a lot of work to make sure that it all feels like a cohesive, nice package, because the place can do a lot of things that is not connecting with the story, but we want it to feel like it's perfectly natural to then continue the story when you feel like it.
Casi para terminar, no sé si lo sabes, pero el mundo de Alan Wake y Control están conectados al punto de que algunos lo llaman el Wake verso. Bueno, pues ahora que Resonant va a ser un RPG donde puedes elegir diálogos y tendrás mucha libertad de decisión, quería saber cómo es que el estudio hizo esto sin afectar todo lo que ya habían construido en temas de narrativa.
Whenever we do a new Remedy game, it's important to us that it stands on its own 2 feet. So it's you can theoretically have not been played any other Remedy game. You can jump in any of them, start playing, and you will hopefully quite quickly kind of understand what's the premise, what are the stakes, and so on, who are the characters, and it's fun to play. So we think of every Control like Remedy experience from that perspective. Having said that, of course, with some games, the franchises is a bit easier compared to others. With Alan Wake, it's inherently valuable for you to understand Alan Wake 1 before you play Alan Wake 2 and so on. With Control, we wanted to be different, where with the shifting protagonist and different setup helps in allowing you to kind of jump in at any kind of a point. But anyway, it's important to us that every game is its own thing, and you can have a satisfying, gratifying experience as you play through it. It has an ending, and it feels like you got what you paid for. Like you got like a good, solid experience that works on its own. It's not dependent on other games around it. But at the same time, we do want these different kind of games and experiences to bleed into each other. So you see little hints of other things, some characters that kind of traverse from one game to another and so on, but never in a way where it feels like you're denied something, or you feel like there's a story to be told, but then we're not telling it, but you have to play this other game. We never want it to feel like that. So it's a very careful balancing act.
Okay.
And with Control Resonant, yes, there's more choice, but we built it in a way that works within its own reality, and whatever connections we have to outside, we have carefully planned with the rest of the Remedy studio.
Algo que le reconozco a Remedy es que no tienen miedo a experimentar, y eso se agradece en estos tiempos donde es común ver remakes y remasters. A veces parece que algunas empresas van a lo seguro con sus juegos, y por eso terminé preguntándole a Mikael qué opina del estado actual de la industria y si cree que algunos desarrolladores tienen menos libertad creativa en estos tiempos.
It depends how you look at it. I think the reality on high-end games like AAA and so on, the costs are going up. It's more and more expensive to make games. There's a lot more specialization and so on. And I think there, the risk-taking is getting smaller and smaller because of the financial realities. Nobody wants to do a game that takes hundreds of millions and with no certainty in regards of how will it sell. So I think there's that reality, and I do feel like it's a complicated place to be in. Then I think there's the indie side, and I think indie is, I'm sure it has its challenges from a financial standpoint, but I also feel like there's a lot of creativity in that space right now, smaller games and so on, that I think they don't have that same pressure to be financially viable or have this sense of certainty of how much it will sell and how much money it will make and so on. It's the opposite almost, like you need to take some risk in that space to stand out. And I think we as a studio, we're kind of somewhere in between these two extremes. Like we feel like for us to be able to stand out, we're not a big studio at the end of the day. Our budgets are not massive. We're not talking hundreds of millions, way below that. But still at the same time, we want to appeal to a group of people who could happily play God of War and then play Control Resonant, that they feel like they are on the same level. So we punch above our weight, I would say. Okay. But we do it with sensible budgets. But having said that, we will never say never, but we, at least today, we can't match the full fidelity in regards of what the heavy hitters are kind of doing. And that's okay. We are ready, and we believe that as long as we kind of stand out with a unique take, like a distinctive vibe, something that nobody else is doing, which we are, I feel, and make genuinely a good game that is fun to play. It's approachable, it's easy, it's engaging, and it's like fun to play. And also it kind of creates an atmosphere, mood, and we tell stories that nobody is telling. I think that's a winning formula.
Pues ahí está la entrevista, espero que hayan disfrutado un poco de estas preguntas y pues ya estarán viendo un poco más sobre la cobertura en el canal de YouTube. Gracias. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bien, pues ahí lo tienes. Yo también creo que los indies son una buena ventana para acceder a nuevas experiencias. Quiero agradecer al equipo de Remedy por tomarme en cuenta para esta cobertura y después de lo que probé, yo no puedo esperar a jugar Control Resonant. Es uno de mis imperdibles de este año y el juego estará disponible para todos a partir del 24 de septiembre. Sí, yo sé, el mismo mes que salen muchísimos juegos más, pero ya que pude probar este, tiene mucha calidad y espero que le vaya muy bien, porque Remedy le mete mucho corazón a sus juegos. Cuéntame, ¿a ti qué te parece lo que viste? ¿Te interesa Control Resonant? ¿Qué opinas de este cambio de shooter a RPG? Gracias si llegaste a este punto del video. Comenta aquí abajito Dylan para saber quiénes son los verdaderos reales y quién sabe, igual y tengo algunas sorpresitas preparadas ahora que salga este juego para los que están escuchando esto exclusivamente. Bueno, pues yo me despido. Sé que este no es el tipo de contenido que suelo subir a este canal, pero últimamente se han presentado las oportunidades de probar juegos de forma anticipada y eso me parece increíble. Todo gracias a tu apoyo y el de los miembros del canal. Kaines, Jugador 0, Soy Bostero 16, Camnimex, Cano Shell Bullet, Quantic Mar, Don Bjorn y Lau Mercer. Ojalá que más gente se anime y crezcan los miembros. Así es, que lluevan los miembros. Bueno, me despido. Yo soy iLion y ahí nos escuchamos en un próximo video. Adiós, bye.